when we take the account number of a business like an SME, we hide everything, and then we create an identifier of it without revealing all those account details of an SME or even a normal user. What actually increases, especially when it comes to security and maybe even other technical advantages that it brings?
So thank you, Promise. When it comes to the proxy, you are hiding your identity behind it. And our market, especially in Rwanda and the rest of Africa, is dominated by USSD payment, where the USSD by itself, by design, is not encrypted. You transfer data on an encrypted channel. There, apart from sharing my account with whoever is paying me, the information is actually transmitting on in secure channel. So I think having the proxy is very important first for security, but also for identity. Recently, I think we implemented it in Rwanda, where I only give you my initial names and you pay me. You don't have to know my bank account. You don't have to know my bank provider. Like if I tell you my account is 0040, you already know that the 40 is reserved for specific banks. But with proxy, if I give you my proxy identifier or the alias, you won't be able to know which bank I bank with, and then I'm protecting my identity. But also the structure of the account. The account is very long, 16 digits, 12 digits. Instead of hassling my payer who is giving me money, I only give 6 digits or 3 characters, and then I'm able to receive the payment. It's facilitated with to ease the payment, but also secure your identity.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think for now, I think you understand exactly what an identifier is, the role it has played in both domestic and cross-border, especially when it comes to normal people, but also SMEs. But then when you're talking about model loop, we're talking about interoperability. What if you have SMEs here in Ghana, and SMEs in Rwanda, SMEs across all Africa, and someone wants to pay something like that, standardization and everything. Before we go into all those things, I want to hear from Olivier, especially how is important, first of all, this discussion to module loop, how it's built in and everything. How do you consider Alias-based payment at module loop?
Thank you. Natively, Mojaloop supported aliases from the initial design. In a way, the Oracle systems were implemented to allow every market to select a kind of aliases they want. They feel it fits their markets. What we saw in most of African markets, they're using telephones as aliases, so which are easy to use. Now, but you find in other markets, they can use email addresses to link to their accounts. All of them are natively supported. So you might find for the purpose of business, identifying businesses, or some use cases using other types of identifiers like taxpayers' identification numbers, or others depending on the markets. For example, you want to pay to a school, so probably they will be having their ERP systems or aggregator who can produce different set of identifiers. Now, what Mojaloop makes sure is that everyone with their kind of set of identifiers, they are supported natively.
Okay.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
have a seamless experience.
Okay, thank you very much. You have mentioned a tax number. I've also read in some industries like the business tax TIN number, the business registration can be used as a proxy identifier. But then we are lucky to be with Claire, especially where she works. I would love to hear from her, like how is the legal entity identifier works, and if it has been implemented and used somewhere so that we can understand exactly how it's working and how it's how it's supposed to help, especially when it comes to the global scene. If I can be able, if let's say I'm in Ghana, there's an SME who has, maybe they have like a legal entity identifier, which is unique. If it can be paid by everyone, it can be someone from US can pay on that legal identifier. I just want to understand how it works and how it's actually changing the way this SMEs proxy identifier works.
So I start by highlighting two words. One was coming, interoperability, from you, from us.
Yes.
And focusing first on the interoperability piece. So indeed, when identifiers are included in a payment message, you want that identifier to serve to open information sources. We did some work with the UN CFAT, so it's in the trade area of the United Nations. It was a basic research to understand what is the usefulness of identifiers in trade. And we came with 3 qualities for identifiers: discoverability, resolvability, and verifiability. So that identifier needs to be discoverable. From what system does an identifier come from? Because usually you need to have a machine process then to resolve the information associated to that identifier. If we bring that to a payment message, for example, it is more efficient to exchange a payment message with an identifier for the beneficiary that could then link to information on the name, the address, etc., rather than putting all that information into the payload of the payment message. And then verifiability would be like a cryptographic attestation that this is an identifier representing the organization, in the case of the Global LEI Foundation, and maybe even someday the person. So when we look at the focus of the use of the LEI within cross-border payments, maybe I highlight the European example that has laid the foundations for using the LEI within payments. In the European Union legislative framework, you have this like trifecta of laws that enables the usage of the LEI. So you have the LEI first recognized within AML legislation as a valid identifier to use in onboarding the legal person clients. You have it also in the transfer of funds legislation. So the LEI can be used to represent the originator and the beneficiary. And then the last layer is the instant payments regulation, where the LEI can be used to replace the name for the verification of beneficiary regime. So this is all an emerging ecosystem, and I think it is a fabulous time that we as the GLIFE have the opportunity to engage with the Moja Loop community, and especially the implementations here on the African continent, because it demonstrates that when you look at cross-border payments, this is an area where innovation has to happen in the upcoming months and years, as we see the revisions with FATF R16, and there is room to put in place a model that takes from the beginning of the learnings, the other jurisdictions like the European Union, but put in place a model where you are comprehensive. So looking at, well, how do you bring identification into payments? You have to start with your client onboarding or the merchant onboarding. How do you use it efficiently, putting it into the payment message? And then for the fraud protection, how do you bring that into the verification of beneficiary, but in a way that doesn't lead to close matches and fuzziness, but enables straight-through processing and a yes/no response? Is this the intended beneficiary for a payment?
Yeah, okay, maybe I can have maybe a follow-up question on that, especially when it comes to, of course, if there's a legal entity identifier and you'd like to adopt actually all markets, if you can say, so that maybe every SME, every merchant, wherever he is, can be easily identifiable and verified, especially in payments, when talking about cross-border payments. I'm just thinking now on how that legal identifier is actually structured, if it has some representation part of the country, if you have already laid down the standards on that legal entity identifier so that it can be easily adopted on the market by everyone. I would like to know if there's a standard that is already established on that part.
So the identifier is a global standard. It is ISO 17442 for those of us that like ISO standards. So this is the number you can find. It has three parts. One is the basic standard. Second is how to use it in digital certificates. And the third is how to use it in something called the VLEI, which is a verifiable credential. And it is a 20-digit alphanumeric code with a check digit. There is no intelligence in it, and that is for a specific reason, because what you find with codes that have intelligence, like country codes, etc., if there is a change, and this does happen and more frequently than you would expect, you then have a problem with that primary key, because now you need to change the primary key given the change to a country code, etc., or a link to a local business registration code. So it is intended to be just that, a dumb code, but linking to a standardized reference data set so that any entity anywhere in the world could be discovered via this unique 20-digit code in a standard way, the name, the address, the basics of the entity, bringing the transparency that's needed for the payment. And also, as I mentioned, that possibility to even consider reducing the load of the payment message by having an identifier to discover this information rather than including all of this in the payment information.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll maybe on EMAB, like in Rwanda, one of the recent use cases that has been taken live is payment to merchants. So normally merchant had their proxy identifiers called as merchant ID or merchant code. And then after now, when you went to implement now the payment to merchant, you realize that there was no standard. You started finding some duplicates, even domestically. So would you take us through how you have addressed that and how you think it can even be done now when it comes to cross-border? Because if internally you have managed to find duplicates because there was no standard, every institution was providing proxy identifier by themselves without standard, without anything else. But then you have started also making the standards. But now when it comes to cross-border, tell us if there was a plan after taking us through what you have gone through with that experience.
Thank you, Promise. Standard is very important. While doing the analysis on our small market, we could figure out that there is overlapping of merchant ID from different acquirers, and some was on purpose. You are MTN, you acquire a merchant, you give them short code, and then Airtel comes to the same merchant. To ease the user friendliness of the code, they give the same code with the MTN. Both codes are similar. If you have Airtel line, you pay on the same code. If you have MTN line, you pay on the same code. So centralizing it was an issue because in our design of our lookup DB, and for information, our lookup DB is centralized. All the merchant has to be on a centralized repository. So we found that there is a collusion of the merchant ID, and from the design perspective, we applied 2-digit prefix in front of the merchant ID. If you are MTN, we give you 08, then followed by the the ID that you had, which is 6 digits. Then it becomes longer, a little bit longer, but with that we avoid the duplicates of merchants. And then any acquirer is free to generate any 6-digit range merchant code, and the system automatically append the prefix with that acquirer. So with that, we are sure that there is no collusion of the merchant code. So the uniqueness of the merchant code was achieved with the prefix. So some will say you will force the market to rebrand the till code that was already printed. But we said even if you put the existing code, provided that it's on us transaction, means if I have MTN line, whatever till code I was paying for will still work. But for you to pay a different carrier, if you are paying a bank or if you are paying Airtel from MTN, then you have to add the prefix. They will be able to have a unique identifier, and then you achieve the uniqueness of the till code. On the cross-border, I think we'll follow the international standard. We are yet to implement that. Maybe we'll learn from Claire, and then we achieve the cross-border merchant payment as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And the same question can actually go to Olivier Manzi. For Moja Loop, you're connecting the world through payments. If in Rwanda we have identifiers for merchants and others, and you also come here in Ghana, the same, and then when you start doing cross-border, there are some duplicates. Is there a way that Moja Loop thinks that they're going to handle that, or it's also on the, yeah?
The way payment systems are built, normally before allowing someone to connect, there are some agreements they make. One is in any scheme rule, how are you addressing people or entities within that scheme. It's really a part of scheme rules. Now, being domestic scheme rules or the domestic systems, like you have a way you've agreed to address those merchants. When you go cross-border, while designing scheme rules for that regional system, it must be taken into account also. Now, are you following standards like GLEF? Are you following anything else? Because in my last meeting with the people from reps in COMESA, they were thinking of, can we keep local identifiers and add like a country code which is used on phones, for example. That was one of the approaches. So any of them, when it comes to module pass, the way it is open to be supported, as I said before, but it's more advisable to follow what the regulators have identified as agreed across that market, actually.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So I think for the normal users, because the most used proxy identifier is the phone, and the phone number is actually unique across the world because of the country codes and everything. But then when it comes to SMEs, it's really different. The business ID number in one country can even be the same in the other country. So when now the global the company that you work for has tried to address that problem, what are the challenges faced, especially when it comes to adoption, when it comes to regulations, of course, because that is something that cannot be done without the involvement of the central banks and everything that. So I want to know and to learn from you the challenges that you have faced on your side.
On premise, you make it exactly right. You have to have the collaboration with the regulatory community. So we as an organization, we are a Swiss foundation. We are set up by the Financial Stability Board in Switzerland. And the idea of the system, it came out of the financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, when the G20 leaders said that the inability to determine entities in marketplaces around the world, this being capital markets, fixed income, derivative markets, this contributed to the financial crisis and the depth of the financial crisis because we were not able to analyze systemic risk emerging. And so the structure of the system is the foundation that manages the operations, the publication of the data as an open public good, the technical connection, API, file downloads. But it is the regulators that make use of the identifier. So you find the LEI today in more than 200 regulations, but these are regulations for capital markets, for fixed income, for derivatives. You do find it already quite extensively in India, in credits and payments, also in China. You find the LEI within the UK CHAPS implementation right now ongoing, but this is for the direct participants into the CHAPS system. But you see it is the regulatory community that endorses the use within particular use cases for first the different marketplaces. And we believe that in the case of the cross-border payments, this will be a similar way that the use of the LEI will expand. One demonstration is the FATF recommendation 16, currently open, where you find the LEI referenced as one of the possible identifiers for legal persons.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So I think before we even open the floor to the public so that they can start asking, especially when it comes to challenges and everything that we have discussed here, I want everyone from you especially because the case that has been faced in Rwanda, especially when we were trying to implement the merchant payment, standardizing those proxy identifier can even be others. So especially from your point of view, Claire, what would be the challenge faced to regulators if some of them are here? And then what would you ask even other implementers that are actually going to use Moduloop in implementing all these things? What should they consider? What should you challenge them to do? Yeah.
So picking up just some of the themes, it's the use of standards, it's focusing on interoperability and putting in place the vision of what's the right structure. And I think the benefit here in this community, in this room, is cross-border payments, like what we see with COMESA, it is just being put in place. So putting in place what is the vision, the ideal to facilitate the straight-through processing, the efficient communication, the best protection of fraud. Because what you see happening for areas where you have existing cross-border payment infrastructures, there's a lot of friction. Why is there friction? Because today in cross-border payments, there is no identity. Whatever information is put on the beneficiary, as long as the account is active, it will go through. And this is a huge friction to now bring identity into transactions that it didn't exist before. So it's almost a benefit to say, okay, where there is an opportunity to build right, to build digital first, put that vision on paper, and then the steps to put it in place, using interoperability standards, et cetera, to avoid repeating the mistakes that exist today in the existing cross-border payments.
Okay, thank you very much. And on you, Aimable, what would you have wished that was done before, maybe implementing the payment merchants, either on the regulatory side or even other DFSP, that would have made your journey, especially when you were implementing the interoperability on the proxy identifier? What would you have wished to have it before, so that maybe other people here who are implementing can actually consider it before they even go far and meet the challenges after?
I think Claire touched on it, is the standard. So if you put standard before, then every acquirer would follow the standard issuing the merchant ID. Therefore, this workaround that we made for adding the prefix would be a different story. Maybe the regulator will give the acquirer a range of digits or find a way to uniquely identify the acquirer based on the merchant code. The standard plays bigger role, and I think while regulators here would push for that, and something else that would help to, in addition to put the standard on the merchant code, would be the merchant categorization, which is quite broad discussion. And for instance, now we are already live. We will go back again to implement the merchant categorization to be able to know the size of the merchant we are serving in what category. That comes again to the standardization, which will help and everyone will benefit, including the regulators as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. This question will go to Olivier and Claire, because I've seen that there's a work stream in Moja Loop for payment address. That's actually what I would like to ask, especially what Moja Loop is doing on that standard thing that have been mentioned. And of course, Claire will also let us know more on what they're doing in that work stream. But I would like to start with Olivier.
In payment addressing workstream, I think the lead is Claire. She's the one to respond to that, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're very grateful we have opportunity to work with Moja Loop on a work stream focusing on payment addressing for merchants. And we approach it with two parallel activities. The one is purely a technical. So when the merchant comes with an LEI, how can that LEI be used to facilitate the digital onboarding? So demonstrating the open public API. That LEI can be used to call the basics, the name, the address, the validation of that data, and when was the data validated to create the first merchant profile. The onboarding then would be the first step to enable the communication of an LEI and payment message. So this is one piece, which is purely technical, looking at technical tools where the merchant has the LEI. And then the second will be where the merchant does not have the LEI. So how to enable merchants to obtain the LEI in a way that is efficient and practical for these communities.
Yeah, so thank you very much. I would like to really challenge the public to engage on this topic, because people are implementing cross-border transaction, and I'm sure after spending much time in implementing the system, and then you find that actually there's a part of standard that is not already touched on, that would really affect the adoption of that, because that's actually what was going to happen in Rwanda. And then they started doing standardization. So I would like the public to engage and ask questions, especially when it comes to these SME and product identifiers. So the floor is open. You can ask.
Hello, thank you for the session. It's very enlightening, especially refreshing to listen from the Global Legal Identifier Foundation and then also the New Market. I have two remarks. So the first one is more of a comment, so anyone can chip in and maybe provide some insight to this as well. And the second one is a question to Claire. The first one regarding the comment itself, I just want to note that for the more for the market of Asia and Southeast Asia, we don't actually use Alias for pay-to-merchant use case. And this is because the business use case of pay-to-merchant mostly, even when it comes to cross-border, you are there in front of the merchant to make the payment. So all of the merchant information is actually packaged in a QR. So you scan a QR, you get all the merchant information, and then you make the payment to said merchant. So because of the existence of that QR, we don't really use Alias for merchant. However, Alias or proxy is commonly used when it comes to peer-to-peer transfer. Because for peer-to-peer transfer and cross-border remittance, you don't necessarily have to be in the store. You can be far away from the person and send funds to them, so you need that proxy for this use case. Now, this comes to the second part, which is the question. From my observation, all the countries who are using proxy right now have different ways on how they use their proxy. Like Malaysia, we use strictly mobile number and also national ID. But for cross-border, of course, it's just a mobile number. For Singapore, they use mobile number as well. In Thailand, they use mobile number as well. But in India, NPCI or NIPL, when we look at how they do it slightly different. They call it UPI ID, where it's basically a mobile number, but they add some prefix to the front, at the front. So my question to Claire, how do you intend to actually work with this quote-unquote mature market to try to see how they can realign or streamline their cross-border Alias? Because I do see that this is a problem, because when it comes to building any network with them, then you have to do different kind of mapping to different country, and it won't work. So there has to be sort of like a stronger standards, impose of standards to this country, or maybe to educate some of the payment network to use the correct global identifier. So is there any effort to do that to the Asian market at least?
So within the Asia market, we have very good dialogues with the ASEAN Secretariat around some work that's being done on something, a regional unique business identifier, which could be a foundation then looking into trade, cross-border payments. I think it just comes back to the regulator. So having dialogues like this, so then the practitioners, the private sector also are aware, so you can go back and also with your regulatory authorities share the information. I mentioned that we as a foundation are overseen by this regulatory oversight committee. So today there are central banks, but there's also security markets overseers, etc. But it is open to any regulator that desires to implement the LEI. So this type of exchange to then allow for the local connections with the regulatory community, raise the topic. It could be that regulators in your country already are participating, and it's just a question of putting the people together, or maybe your regulator also likes to join into this oversight committee, because it is in the payments area or any financial transaction, you have to be deeply rooted into the regulatory community to advance forward.
I have two questions for Aimable actually around like your implementation of merchant registry, because I feel like it's a sort of light merchant registry, at least to manage the duplicate issue. So first question is, who is managing and overseeing the merchant registry? Is it you, or is it in collaboration with the central bank? Second question is, if it's you only, can this code be used by different whales? And the third question is around, what is your end-to-end process so that you manage fraud around somebody asking a code when they shouldn't be asking for a code?
Thank you. We put the standards. The acquirer generate the merchant code based on the standard, and then they share the code to us for the centralized repository. That is one. Second, the payment processes. It starts with lookup. You have to confirm if you put the merchant ID, you get the exact name of that merchant that you are intended to pay. We have name verification that is mapped to that merchant. If particular code, maybe you put the wrong code, then you'll get a different name. From there, you'll be able to cancel the payment. The third question was related to the fraud. So we are planning to implement Tazama. For instance, we only collaborate with participants. If there is a fraudulent transactions, for instance, we don't have a tool that would notify us, neither the participants, if that is a fraudulent transaction. But we're in collaboration with different players. We'll be able to advise if there is a fraud, then we'll work closely to block or to do any recovery method that is needed.
Thank you. I have a couple of observations. One of them is an observation really for me to remember, and that is that I was very interested in what Fariz had to say about the way things happen in Southeast Asia. And it occurred to me that one of the things that we do in Modular Loop is we specify, or we ask the DFSP to specify, what kind of identifier is being talked about. So is it a phone number? Is it a merchant ID? Is it a national ID? That kind of thing. And different payment schemes will have different sets of identifiers that they support. So I started to think, what if I were a Rwandan who had come to visit Ghana, and I want to pay in a shop, and in Ghana, they use, I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm going to say a merchant ID. But in Rwanda, we don't use a merchant ID. We don't have that identifier. Our scheme doesn't support it. So now I read the code and it says, I want to pay this merchant ID, but I can't put that into my Rwandan system because my Rwandan system doesn't recognize merchant IDs. So that means that in order fully to support interoperability, we are either going to have to say every interoperable scheme is going to have to support the same set of identifiers, or we're going to have to say there needs to be some type-free way of identifying something. So that's something that I guess the payment identification work stream is going to need to put on its list of things to think about. The other point that I want to make is I want to go back to a point that Claire made earlier about how Glyph works. And one of the things that she said is Glyph is a way of identifying things in automated systems. I think that's a rough paraphrase, but you know what I mean. So it's a 20 alphanumeric character. It relies on the fact that you can obtain that in some automated way, like reading a QR code. But we have also to cater for the case where we're talking about human input. So we're talking about a human-to-system interface. And this is the one, again, I want to go back to what Aimable was saying. You go in to a merchant, a coffee bar, let's say, in Rwanda, and there's a short code to pay. It's an Airtel short code, may also work for MTN, but it's up to 6 digits. It's relatively simple to enter. Now, the problem with that is there's a trade-off in my mind between the ease of entering an identifier and what I'm going to call the uniqueness space of that identifier. Now, a merchant shortcode has a small uniqueness space. It's 1 or maybe 2 DFSPs in one country. Now, the question then is, how can I identify which of those uniqueness spaces I want to talk about? There may be ways of doing that, but they may be different for different kinds of identifiers. So, for instance, if you look at a phone number, that has an international dialing code on the front of it. So when I look at that phone number, I can tell which jurisdiction that phone number belongs to. That's not true for a merchant number. Typically, it's not true for a national ID. If, for instance, I use a mail address, I can identify the provider because they'll be on the end of the mail address, and I can tell that it's something is going to be unique within that provider. But do you see what I mean? So we need, I think, if we're going to look at providing a human interface for widely interoperable systems, we're going to need to think about some way of identifying the uniqueness space of a particular identifier, because I don't think we want to give up the idea that we want something that's really short and memorable, and preferably something that's short and memorable where the uniqueness space can be identified more or less automatically. I don't have an answer for this, I just want to raise it as a question.
Thank you very much. That's actually a very good point, Richards, because as I've mentioned when I was starting, one of the things that really led to the high adoption of mobile money is because, first of all, it was phone numbers, and actually the part of usability, easy to use, it's also really something that is critical on that part. Yes.
Hi, I've heard a lot about Alias working for Mojaloop, but thanks for this session because this just sort of taught me a lot more about it. And I think, Richard, your raising of this issue of ease of input is something that's been a chief concern of mine, but I think there can be context, and potentially with I guess, some automated systems, and maybe you can have some contextual lookups where you can look up a short identifier to quickly get you to that longer identifier. But certainly it's not necessarily an easily solvable problem. But I guess on the back of democratizing LEIs, like I got a little bit excited, and I just quickly decided that I'd get an LEI for my own company. And I see that it's $75 a year. And so that, given that SMEs now have an identifier that is free, I guess, for domestic transactions, is there some sort of, I guess, initiative to lower that cost? Because I don't think SMEs, like sort of, trading between Zambia and Malawi are going to pay anything a year for an LEI. Even though it would be very useful to them for cross-border payments.
Indeed, this is, you could say that parallel piece to the work stream is for the merchants that don't have the LEI, which would be the vast majority today, how to get it to them in the most efficient way. So we think that especially in Africa, this is a continent that is very well positioned to engage the LEI within the business registration process. For example, we work right now with Nigeria, the Corporate Affairs Commission, to integrate the issuance, the LEI, with the new business registration. So Corporate Affairs Commission Nigeria, you think they have all the business processes in place, which are duplicated in the global LEI system, the validation verification, this is really an entity to be being created, authorized signatories, etc. So what is the business process change for Corporate Affairs Commission Nigeria? It's two really simple things. A second code generator. This can be implemented in hours with technical people. And the second is a simple ETL layer. So Corporate Affairs Commission Nigeria has their internal database with their own data tags, and then there is the global common data file format with the tags for the legal name, the address. So all you need is an ETL layer that maps the two databases together and then push the data. You don't even need a replicated database locally. So we believe what we do at Corporate Affairs Commission Nigeria is a starting point to replicate in other nations. And why I say Africa is uniquely positioned, because in Africa, every African nation has one registration authority for companies. If you look across the world, this is not like this. I give you the example in Germany, there are 120 local courts where business registration is managed. If you look at the UAE, you have somewhere at like 50, 60 registrations. Each of the free economic zones, each of the Emirates have their registration. You look to the United States, 50 states, 50 registrations. So this is not a solution to scaling in these jurisdictions, but within the African continent, it is a solution that can be applied.
Thank you very much. I think this is a challenge to everyone, be it in regulation, industry, or even other businesses, because this is something that needs to be addressed and worked on, especially when it comes to standards. So I really thank you for your time. I think this is the end of our panel. So thanks for your attention. Thank you.